Right, so we are the Georgia Reptile Society. Welcome, one and all. Good to see you guys again. It's been about a year since we've been to Randar, so it's really nice to be back. And this talk today is going to be all about legless lizards in the world. Very brief, very sort of mild overview. Got any questions? I'll do my best to answer, but honestly, there's not a lot that I can beyond what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what I know, right? So, all right. So the term legless lizard really refers to not just lizards without limbs, but also lizards with a reduced limbs, limbs that are almost vestigial in nature. Right? And so a lot of these lizards that maybe have like a little nub, a little sort of claw almost stuck to their bodies, but are sort of gone. And it's interesting that they can be found all over the world. And there's about 100 different species, more than 100 different species of legless or reduced limb lizards. So just to start off, just a sort of an overview of taxonomy. So we know that the different levels of taxonomy, the King's Play cards on fat green stools, we've got kingdom followed by what? Phylum, and then King's Play cards, class, order, family, genus, species, right? That's what I learned when I was in elementary school, middle school, right? But that's very simplistic. Taxonomy is a very changing, very evolving science, and there's a lot of different shades to it, and oftentimes genetic drift and speciation is hard to pin down. Exactly. So they have what's called superorders, right? And so superorders are basically just groups of different orders of animals that get grouped together, but they aren't broad enough to become a class, right? So there's a superorder of reptiles called Lepidosaurus, right? Lepidosaurus basically refers to anything that has overlapping scales. So you've got lizards, you've got snakes, and you've got tuataras, right? Tuataras form their own order called Rhynchocephalia, right? And then you have Squamata, which involves your lizards and your snakes. From there, we have what are called suborders. We're not even at family yet. We have the Lacertilia suborder, which involves just your lizards, and then you have Serpentae, then you have a different suborder, which we'll get into in a second, where the Lacertilia refers to just all the lizards, and then from there you have what are called infraorders. We have 5 infraorders, and then finally you get to families, and there are about 30 different lizard families and about 6,000 species, right? So we're talking...
Is Homo sapien like an ultra order?
Well, so Homo sapien would be like the genus species, like all the nomenclature goes genus species, right? So we have we're talking specifically about 6 different families and then 1 different suborder of Squamata, right? So we have the first is Anguidae, which refers to your glass lizards and your slow worms, your Sheltopusix. We'll get into it a little bit here. Cordyllidae, which refers to sort of Central Africans legless lizards. There's about 70 species. There's one genus, this is called Chamasaura, like this highland grass lizard, which has these little vestigial little limbs there. Once again, they're all located in Central Africa. Pygopodidae, which refers to all these Australian legless lizards, and they have a lot in common with geckos, which we'll get into in a second. This is a red-tailed worm lizard, which is found in southwestern Australia, just north of Tasmania. And Anielidae, which are legless lizards found out west in California. There are the American legless lizards. This is called the Southern California legless lizard. And again, we'll talk more about those later on. And then Gymnophthalmidae, which is a broad family. It has lots of different genuses or genera with different species of legless lizards. But there's one genus in particular located in South America and the Caribbean called Bachia. Bachia has these different, very tiny, they're only like 2 inches long. They're usually measured in millimeters. These little lizards that have these very underdeveloped limbs, which again,
talk a lot. Seen a serpentine shape.
Yeah, very much so. All right, and then finally, Skinkidae. Right, skinks are the biggest family of lizards. You have 1,500 different species in the skink family, and most of the legless skinks are found in Africa, like this Tanzanian legless lizard, which is also called a lance skink. All these lance skinks come from the same genus. This is a Percival's lance skink from this from its scientific name. So, and then these are all families of lizards, right? Lizards, the suborder Lacertilia, right? They're squamates, but there's another suborder of Squamata called Amphisbaenia. Amphisbaenia are what we're often called worm lizards. And they're not lizards, or they're not snakes. They have a lot of similarities to different both of those groups, but they also have a lot of differences. And then again, we'll get into the differences in a second. So the first family we'll talk about, just real quick, slow worms. A very brief overview of slow worms. You find them all throughout Europe and Western Asia. So from Russia down to the UK, you find them all over the place. This is a female slow worm that was found in France. Right, like I said before, they're native to Eurasia. What they do is they're mostly carnivorous. They're about 6 inches long. and they mostly eat slugs and different sort of invertebrates. And so what people like to do is they like to kind of put out traps, you might say, mostly like pie plates or roof tiles that'll attract the sunlight, attract the heat, and they'll find them like hiding underneath there trying to bask, and they'll put them in their garden, keep the slugs off their tomatoes, things like that. They are oviviviparous. They give live birth, and right here you can kind of see this is the general size of a slow worm, about 6 inches long, and they are actually kind of endangered in the UK, mostly due to feral cats. There's a lot of problems here in the United States with feral cats, people letting their cats roam around, killing a lot of native species, but also a lot of these slow worms are absolutely defenseless when it comes to being brought up with cats. Well, and again, the idea of being defenseless is a thing. A lot of these vestigial limbs and these the reduction of limbs was like there was no evolutionary need for them to have limbs or have any means of escape beyond what we'll get into in a second here. All right, so glass lizards from the genus Ophisaurus. Now, this right here is a Sheltopusik, which we have one right here, often called a European glass lizard. Let's see if we can get them out. They can get pretty big. They can get to be about 50 inches long, about 4 feet long. Because they're so big, they tend to not drop their tails, which is interesting enough the reason why they were called glass lizards in the first place. They have the ability to drop their tail, and then their tail can actually break apart into smaller pieces. So autotomy is interesting because they actually have this process of fracturing along these different planes between muscle fibers and between blood vessels and between the actual vertebrae, where these strong sphincter muscles actually close off the different arteries and keep the blood loss down. So they can actually grow a new tail, but that can take up to a year, and it's never quite the same. It's a huge loss to the body mass and stored fat. So it's a big sacrifice to make in order to try to save their lives. But usually they'll grow it back. It'll be a lot smaller, and there'll be a spine of cartilage going down instead of bone. So once again, these are European glass lizards, often called Sheltopusiks. You find these guys in the middle of the area between Western Europe and Russia, like Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Hungary, places like that.
That's like a little stretch mark on the side.
Well, that actually they can
up if
they can use that to expand their body and make themselves look better, and they do tend to bite and tend to thrash around with their tail as opposed to dropping off their tail, much a little bit unlike the glass lizards we have here in the United States. This right here, the slender glass lizard, Ophisaurus attenuates. We find those all over the place, out west, as far north as Illinois, as far south as Florida, and you can find some in the grasslands in Florida. They are oviparous. They lay eggs, which we can see right here in this hatchlings of these eastern glass lizards, which are found right here in Georgia and down in Florida as well. You can find those down in the sort of sandy areas in Georgia, like Cumberland Island, places like that, Brunswick. I've been down to Cumberland Island a couple of times. We never saw any. We saw a lot of gopher tortoises.
I caught these as a kid in Arkansas. They live anywhere where there's tall grass that has a root mat underneath the grass, and they just kind of stay burrowing it, and nothing knows they're there.
Yeah.
They can live there its whole life.
Yeah, but most of these are fossorial. They mostly burrow. They all have that same sort of look.
Yeah.
These shovel-like snouts and sort of blunt tails.
You see them after big rains, they come up on the surface.
All right. So the next genus we'll talk about is Chordilidae. Now, Chordilidae, once again, is mostly based in Central Africa, and it includes this genus Chamaesora, which are often called grass lizards. This right here is called the Chamaesora anguina, often called the Cape grass lizard. We'll get some other pictures in just a second. Another African one, you find this is their range right here. You can find them, they're right here, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola, into different places in the Congo and into Zambia and Zimbabwe, all the way down to South Africa. A big range with the Cape grass lizard. And let's see if we can't get a little closer here. I want to say this is Chamaesora anea. Anea is the Latin word for bronze. It kind of names after its sort of brassy color.
Yep.
And it has a very small range. It's I think the only two sightings they really know were in South Africa, Lesotho, and I want to say Nigeria, right? And so
these are all bug eaters, basically.
Basically, yeah, mostly beetles. What they'll do is they'll actually stay above ground. They won't burrow. They'll swim around the grass. They have these little vestigial limbs. Let's see, a little closer here. Yeah, this is the one we had before, the first one. This is the Cape grass lizards and grass lizards and glass lizards. It's kind of interesting here. So right, yeah, these are all Central African legless lizards. This Cordillidae has a lot of different species in it. I want to say actually maybe like 7 or 8, maybe a little more. But these are two good examples of those. All right, so the next family we'll talk about is Pygopodidae. Now, Pygopodidae has 35 species, and they have 5 different genera, and they're all located in Australia. This right here is called the Brigalows scalyfoot, and we'll talk about why they're called scalyfoot in just a second. Any of the scalyfoot lizards are all from the same genus. They're all from the what you call Paradelma, and there's another genus called the Delma. The Delma were only recently separated. It kind of goes back to the whole idea that the idea of separating genus is an ongoing process that has changes almost every year. So this right here is a eastern hooded scalyfoot. It's related to the one before. Scalyfoot. They have little scaly. We'll talk about why they're called. They're actually, interestingly enough, very close related to geckos. They don't actually have any eyelids, and they don't have a forked tongue. And if you were to get really close to their eyes, you would notice they have a very slit pupil, a lot like the geckos do, very much unlike kind of common lizards. So they're very related to. They say that they're a further evolution of geckos that are missing their limbs. And if you look right here, you can see that they have this little scaly flap, and in this, it's hard to see, there's a little square right here that you can see that's their paracloacal spur the males use for mating. So they have this little scaly flap. They also have a spur involved too. Kind of difficult to see there, but it's present.
I see it. Okay.
And so, like I said, they're all native to Australia. These scalyfoot ones are all in the west, right? The west of Australia. It's a big country. It's about as big as the 48 contiguous United States, but it doesn't have near as much diversity in its ecosystems. Most of the western Australia is all rocky desert. In the south, there's a lot of grasslands, southwest or southeast rather, down south near Tasmania. There's a little island off the south eastern coast. This little pink-tailed worm lizard, which is Procea parapicella, you find those all over the place. They actually have a very slow reproductive cycle. They actually only lay 2 eggs every year. And they're obviously oviparous. They just lay eggs. They're only about 5.5 inches long, and they mostly feed on ants. Much like this one right here, Delma impar. Once again, the ones we had before, the scalyfoots, they're Paradelma. This one's Delma. Delma impar is the name, is the genus species of this one. The striped legless lizard. Now this legless lizard is actually on its way out. It's almost extinct. Habitats have been almost completely destroyed, and there's only one habitat where they're living the wild now. That's in Canberra, the southeastern city, which is the capital of Australia, and it's pretty clear that they're actually going to develop that pretty soon. So they're doing that sort of thing where they hide the roof tiles, they hide the pie plates. They're trying to relocate them somewhere like maybe 70 miles away from Canberra so they can keep these alive in the wild. There is a big push to breed the scalyfoots too, because I saw these pictures here on a breeding site, on a little fauna classified type site that I think was centered around Australia. But all right. So moving on to Anielidae, the American legless lizards. So they're actually a relatively newly sort of sought-after family. It was discovered in the early 2000s. These American legless lizards, they're a little different from glass lizards. Most of them are smaller. They have a different sort of coloration to them. They also don't drop their tails. They don't have that autonomy defense that the glass lizards do. And this right here is the California legless lizard. It's you can see it has a sort of shovel snout, like a lot of the sand boas do, and it has sort of a top sort of dorsal scales that are this olive green and ventral scales that is yellow. A lot of the species that we recognize now were once thought to be sort of localities of this species here, the California. So all the other ones, for instance, this one, the Baja California legless lizard, it has this sort of silvery gray look to it. And again, for the longest time, they thought it was a color morph locality of the Aniella pulchra. Finally, we have this one, Aniella stebbensi, the Southern California legless lizard, which you can see the similarities between these two. You have on the top, you have one color, and then on the bottom, you have yellow, just like up here. Top green, bottom on the yellow. This one's a little more tan on the top. The other differences are pretty hard to spot. But what's cool about this one, I think, Aniella stebbensi was named after Robert C. Stebbins. Stebbins, if you don't know, created this field guide called a guide to Western. To reptiles and amphibians of the Western United States. It's very cool, real thick book that we actually got a copy of somewhere knocking around our house. I did a talk on early herpetologists a couple of years ago, and he was one of them. Him along with Dumeril, the guy that Dumeril's bows are named after. But he definitely earned this. He died in 2013, around the same time they discovered these new species of legless lizards in California, and he definitely earned this little honorific here. So the next group, Gymnopthalidae, like I said before, mostly in Central and South America, they have a lot of different genera that have legless lizards, but this particular genus, Bacchia, stands out. Now, Bacchia aleni is found in this little island nation of Grenada. You can see right here they have this little clear eyelid that's on the bottom of their eye, right? And so it looks like you're wearing kind of like bifocals almost, or little reading glasses. So they're often called spectacled lizards. So this one right here, Bacchia aleni and Bacchia heteropa, they're actually the same species. I think this is actually a subspecies. They're actually Bacchia heteropa aleni. This was sort of mislabeled here. But as you can see, they're usually measured in millimeters. This one's only about 2.5 inches long, and because they're so small, it's really difficult to learn a whole lot about their physiology, because dissecting something that small is really difficult without damaging the internal organs. So like I said, not a whole lot's known. Again, that they mostly feed on ants. They mostly live in the jungles throughout Central South America and the Caribbean, and they're so hard to spot, there really isn't a whole lot of common names for them. They're always known by their scientific names. For instance, this one, Bacchia trinitatis, it's named that because it was found in the island nation of Trinidad. They really were only discovered in like the 1970s. Like 1973 was the first really documented case of them being put in a journal. And even as late as 1995 and 2003, they've discovered new ones. So they're so small and elusive, it's really difficult to figure out how many there are, how many different species there are, and it's always changing all the time. This one right here is the Bacchia bicolor. It's called bicolor because it has two colors, right? It has the sort of light on the top and brown on the sides. And so once again, we see it has this very small body. It's sitting there on a leaf right there. So anyway, Gymnopthalidae, mostly this family always found throughout South America, Central America, and this particular genus Bacchia is a very mostly filled with different species of legless lizards. All right, so the next one, Skinkidae, was the last lizard family we talk about. Mostly found in Africa. This right here, Chalcides minutus. This is called just one second here, the three-toed skink. You can see it has this little useless sort of nubbins right there. This little three-toed sort of appendage there that doesn't really do a whole lot. It is fossorial. They do give live birth. They are oviparous. They do like to burrow. And again, this one right here is found throughout North Africa. The Chalcides genus is actually described as being a clade of African skinks. So it's like their one big unifying characteristic. They're all found in Africa. There are some, however, that are found in North Africa and Southern Europe. We have right here this Chalcides striatus, which is found in Portugal, and this is called the eastern three-toed skink versus just the three-toed skink. So once again, Morocco, Portugal, if you know your geography, you've got Morocco, then you've got 8 miles of ocean, only 8 miles before you get to Gibraltar, which is in Spain, or attached to Spain, belongs to Britain. And then next to Spain is, of course, Portugal. So Portugal, Morocco, not too far away. So it really stands to reason they might have the same animals there. All right. So, in Africa, one second, let me see here. This right here, yes, Acanthias is a genus of skinks known as lance skinks, right? They find them throughout Central Africa. This right here, Acanthias percivalis, is the Tanzanian legless lizard, or oftentimes called Percival's lance skink. And we can show this one off right here. And you recently... We recently gave one away that was pregnant, right?
Yeah, I kicked myself. It gave birth a couple weeks after the guy got home. And the baby was
keep the babies going.
Yeah, I'm wondering how the baby will do, because feeding something that tiny. But the female wasn't much bigger than this.
So if you can imagine like the map of Africa, kind of like a strip of land south of the Sahara Desert. So you've got Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and of course Tanzania. Tanzania is this island nation. It's Tanzania, Mozambique, a little bit of water, then Madagascar. If you can remember where Madagascar is, that's essentially what we're talking about, sort of Central African lizards here. The next genus is Phalinia. Now, Phalinia is a very small genus of limbless skinks found in sub-Saharan Africa, a little farther north, often near the Atlantic coast. This species here, Phalinia coulori, is the most widespread species with isolated populations found in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Now, though Sierra Leone is actually kind of dubious, it was sort of still being peer-reviewed, but it can reach sizes up to a foot long and tends to burrow. Most of the specimens have been found in this little place called the Kakamega Forest. It's a span of trees that goes from Guinea to the Congo, and they often think that it's sort of dependent on the forest. So this skinkidae, most of the legless skinks, are found in Africa. That's what you'll find there. All right, so that ends. We're talking about lizards, but this next group, Amphisbaenia, once again, like I said before, it's not a lizard at all. It's a different order. It's from the order Squamata that's been separated into different suborders. The suborders. Once again, we had Lacertilia for lizards, we had Serpentae for snakes, and then we have this group, Amphisbaenia, which is a group of what we call worm lizards. So it's a separate order of reptile. This right here, the Amphisbaenia is the suborder, and Amphisbaena is I think there's another Amphisbaenidae, which is the family, and then Amphisbaena, which is the genus, right? So Amphisbaena darwini, which is Darwin's worm lizard, found in South America, found in Colombia. You notice they've got a lot of different characteristics as opposed to snakes and opposed to lizards, and even as opposed to different legless lizards. So in terms of their evolution, in terms of their locomotion, for one thing, they don't have the ventral scales that snakes do, and they don't have that sort of motility that this snake does, or this lizard does here. What they do is they mostly accordion their skin up in different places, like an earthworm does, hence the name worm lizard. And what they'll do is they'll sort of accordion their skin up to one point, and the rest of their body will drag along with it, sort of big drag along. And they can do this sort of action in reverse just as easily as they can going forward. Now also, snakes have one vestigial lung and one long lung that they use, and that lung tends to be on the left. Now, Amphisbaena have the same thing. They have one vestigial lung and then one lung that extends throughout most of their body, but that lung tends to be on the right. So it's an odd little thing there that they have the same thing, but it's just one side the other. It literally seems as if they had a common ancestor. One went left, one went right, and then boom, they look a little different. A million years later. Finally, they tend to be eyeless. And I'll actually skip ahead a couple things here. This is the same, this one with the Darwini. If you skip ahead to the next one right here, this is the Darwini. You can see its eyes are these sort of useless kind of blank orbs there. They do have sort of parasensory organs in their skull that don't quite do the same thing as eyes. But this one right here, this is called the black and white worm lizard, Amphisbaena fulginosa, which happens to be located in Tunisia, is a North African country. So we see right here, this one only reaches sizes of maybe about 18 inches long. The Darwini reaches sizes of about 6 to 8 inches long.
You did so good for so long.
He's very close.
He objects to this.
But the last one we'll talk. Last one we'll talk about is the Amphisbaena alba, which is found in Venezuela. So like I said, they have this worldwide range. You can find them in Africa, you can find them in Central America, and you can find them in Asia, and even in the United States. There are about 200 different species, about 180 still living species, a little more that have been kind of come and gone.
And I want one of these.
Well, yeah, they're really neat looking, like in terms of the way they move, and in terms of the way they get around. The idea they still have the same sort of articulation that lizards do, but they just are a little bit different. It's really interesting the way they decide to put them in a different category from lizards and snakes altogether. All right, so the last thing, just to sum up. I thought it was interesting, if you look around, these like leglessness, missing your legs, it was found in lots of different species. So for instance, we have amphibians. We actually possess a greater siren, one of our Georgian natives here. They're missing, these are basically salamanders that are missing their back limbs. Their forelimbs are there just to kind of like bump them around. They really don't lift themselves up. They can crawl around on the ground. They do have proto-lungs, but they have these gills on the sides of their head. This right here is a two-toed amphiuma. which we actually possessed one for a while. They like to eat crayfish. They have very strong jaws, but once again, their limbs are these useless little sticks. They barely do anything with these limbs. And then finally, we have these little Sicilians, which are just these nasty little earthworm-looking guys that have these nasty little teeth. And they look kind of like the. Have you ever see Tremors? Maybe right with the little.
But those are in Georgia?
Yes.
I think there are some that are native, and I really want one, but they're really hard to find.
Yeah. So these are all amphibians that have no limbs, and you could also look into the ocean, see these different fish. For instance, lampreys and hagfish. The jury's out on whether or not they had fins once and then lost them through some evolutionary
Aren't
niche.
they in like the eel family or something?
Well, no, they're jawless. That's the whole idea. That they're
it's like a worm then.
Yeah, well, they're their own category. The jawless fish that don't. They're not eels. They're not even.
It's not a reptile.
Yeah, not a reptile. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they've been like that since for about 360 million years.
Right. It's the idea is that some people think that they might have had fins once and then lost their fins for some reason or other, or they might never have had fins. Much the same way that sharks had cartilaginous skeletons before bony fish did, but they still continue to live. So these guys obviously weren't outcompeted by their compatriots that had fins. And we remember seeing this little video of these hagfish on a whale carcass, and the way they move around is just interesting. They'll turn themselves into a knot. They'll latch on to the whale carcass. They wrap themselves in a knot and rip their mouths away to get a mouthful of flesh. It's eerie, but yeah, it works for them.
Aren't they also slimy?
Yes, they do produce like a huge amount of slime.
Disgusting.
Yeah, nasty little creatures.
They could stay down in the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
And then finally, of course, we all know birds. We have kiwi that don't have any limbs at all. They are missing their wings completely. Their wings are there, but they're very vestigial. Like, penguins don't fly, ostriches don't fly, but they still use their wings to some purpose. They still have them. Kiwis, for the longest time, were the apex predator, which is interesting to think about. Just like axolotls, for the longest time, were the apex predator. These little defenseless birds, just like these little defenseless salamanders, had zero reason to escape from predators. They had zero reason to fly, to catch prey. So they lost their wings completely over the course of the next million years. And when, of course, other animals were introduced, like stoats and dogs and cats, then they were driven almost to the point of extinction. There's still a lot in these preserves all throughout New Zealand. Also, this bird right here, the moa, is this large flightless bird that was about 12 feet tall. They actually think it stood more like a velociraptor with its head forward, kind of like balanced forward. But they were there. Reports like sort of records or scratchings on a wall were there.
They killed them all.
Yeah, when the Polynesians got there. Well, yeah, when the Polynesians got there in the 12th century, they were there. By the time the 15th century, the 1400s, they were gone. Like the Maori had hunted them to death. But skeletons have been seen of the females being about 12 feet tall, the males being about 6 feet tall. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've heard of these birds. Yeah, they died out a little early, probably a little after the Ice Age, maybe.
Well, these were more recent. These were like
more recent,
early
yeah.
1800s, like 1820s.
I had heard there was like more like 1500s. Yeah.
They were there.
Well, regardless, you can see their relatives now with the still living cassowary birds, and even ray types that live in South America. But yeah, so that is me. Questions? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is a little talk we've been kind of planning since we got into Legless lizards for the past couple of months here.
Yeah.